Good evening. Hi, my name's Scott McArthur and welcome to Artefact, the art and science of storytelling. Well, guys, it's week 16, unbelievably, and I've decided to do something different this week. Those of you who have been watching over the last few months now will know that I've been going through the whole gamut of human emotions and human experience to try and give you a feel for just how central to us being us storytelling is, and I'll come back to that in a minute or two. But this week I just thought, because it was coming up to Christmas, I thought I'd just be here myself this week and we'd have a chat together around the fire about what we've done, where I'd like to go, why we're doing it. And I'm going to have some poetry again because I can't help myself. So if you're there, say hello. I can see some of you are there already, so thank you for joining me. And there's a few new people hopefully coming this week because I've had some lovely feedback from people who've been watching me in different parts of the world. So that's lovely as well. So welcome, one and all. I just want to kind of remind you of the sort of the 2 or 3 things that have came up from this experience already that I think are very worth repeating. And the first one, and it was really last week, it was quite funny in the show I did with Tom Stanhope, the wonderful Tom Stanhope, the filmmaker. I mucked this up, which is really funny after all these weeks of talking to you about it. But it's that saying that, if you've watched some of the highlight reels or some of the full shows, hopefully you'll have heard me say it in nearly every show, that facts tell but stories sell. It's such a powerful little phrase that I must get a t-shirt done, but it's such a powerful little phrase that I really think we need to dwell on it just for a little while again. And I'm gonna tell you some of the sort of the background to this that I think can really help us all. So, but before I do that, just let me know you're there. Say hello. I can see some of you are there, but just let me know you can hear me. Whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, etc. Let me know, and then we can move on, because there's been a few technical issues in the past. I think we've ironed them out now. I think it was all down to a combination of the problem between the keyboard and the chair. But I'd never used this technology, 15 weeks ago. I'd never even heard of Restream, so it's all pretty new. But so if you're there, say hello for me, guys, just to make sure I can see you, but just to make sure you can hear me, and we can be moving on. So the thing I'd like to talk to you again about is the whole idea of facts tell, stories sell. And this came to my attention, first of all, from some research. And oh, hi, how you doing? Nice to see you. Thanks for saying hello. This came from some research by a journalist. His name was Rob Walker. And what Rob experienced was quite odd. It was from Michael Jackson, believe it or not, the now somewhat discredited pop star. And if you remember the red leather jacket that he wore in the Thriller videos, Rob noticed that this had been for sale on eBay or something. I can't remember the exact place where it was for sale. But he was amazed that it was worth so much money. It was like $50,000, and this was a jacket that you could pick up in a store for $50. And he thought, and he said, well, obviously it's because it was Michael Jackson's jacket. And of course, the story there is that Michael Jackson had this jacket. He made the Thriller video with it, a very famous, iconic video and piece of music, and it sold for all this money. And he thought, I wonder if that's true for other types of stories, and will that also create value when a story is attributed to an object? So he created, and I'll put it on the screen for you here, he created something called the Significant Object Project. And what he did was he went out and he basically went to thrift shops and he purchased a couple of hundred little trinkets, ranging from little sort of unicorn type things through to basically little cups and little ornaments and all sorts of rubbish. He then went out to he thought, well, how do I get stories? Well, I need to find some storytellers. So he went out to the market to find some writers. And so he did that, and he got them to write stories about each of these 200 objects. Now, as you'll see if you go to the website that's on the screen just now, he's not just done it once, he's done it a few times, but this was the first time. So off he went, and he got the stories done, and he spent, top of my head, I think it was a couple of $100 on all these objects, so roughly $1 per object that he purchased in these thrift stores. He then, to his astonishment, found that the items started to sell on eBay. That was the first thing. He was astonished anyone would buy these objects. But he's even more astonished when he noticed the value that they were going for. But the story was connected to the object went up to 2,000% more than what they had paid for it from eBay. They ended up making, quite a few £1,000 from this, a few $1,000, sorry. To the point that he was quite embarrassed and felt that he was being criminal, so he gave all the money back to the people. But it ended up, the project has grown and grown and grown and grown and grown, and it really, really demonstrates that if you add a story to something, it can really add to the value of that something. And I'd like to postulate this week. After these 15 weeks of covering all these different subjects, I think it's really important that you don't only attribute stories to objects. I think it's quite important that you start to think about what's your own story. Now, there's something, for those of you who have been in Scotland or indeed are from Scotland, you'll know that in certain parts of Scotland, the first thing people say to you is, so what's your story then, big man? They'll look at you and they'll go, right, tell us all about you. And it's quite funny that, because when you reflect on it, it's a pretty good way to get to know somebody quite quickly. So when someone says to you, what are you all about? What's the first thing people normally say? They normally say, so what do you do? And I think there's value in that. I think if you think about that question, or you think about any interaction really, is there a story you could add about you? And I'll repeat again how I've done this, and I'll just check the chat while I'm gathering my thoughts. No, there's nothing there. Good. I'll repeat the way I've started to do it. Now, I'm not saying I've done this perfectly, not at all. But since the first lockdown, some 9 months ago, and I decided that I was going to start making films and I was going to start broadcasting, hopefully at that point. Didn't know I was going to do it. But and I started to think about, okay, how am I going to differentiate myself from everyone else that's doing this? I thought, well, the best way to do that is just to be me and is to tell my own stories. So what I did was I got a spreadsheet and I wrote basically the years from when I was born right through to now down. And I thought, right, I'll see if I can remember what happened in each of those various years. Now, of course, I couldn't remember very well anyway what had happened. So what I did was I went to Wikipedia. I then looked at significant things that had happened in those years, and that suddenly started to trigger things. So, when Lady Di died, or when Thatcher got voted out of government, or when, when the Berlin Wall came down, or I'm showing my age now, but these are all things that have happened in my lifetime. And when the Challenger space shuttle exploded, or there's so many of them. When Hearts won the cup for the first time in 50 years, or all sorts of things. And I wrote them all down, and then I started to think about, okay, where was I? What was I doing? And I've started to then write down stories from each one of those years. And believe it or not, I've now got a spreadsheet with over 300 stories in it. And there's a lesson in that, guys. And that's why I've come back to this today as a pretty much a non-themed week. I think, and I really think this, and I really believe this, that we're all storytellers. And the way that you can differentiate yourself from others, whether that's in the market, if you're going for a job, or whether it's if you're a professional speaker, but if you're a leader, if you're a manager, but just if you're a human being, being an archaeologist of your own life is something that I would really encourage people to think about, because, you know, things have popped out that I had forgotten. You know, I had just forgotten. I mean, one of my heroes, and it's today's quite an interesting date because it's 21/12 today. And if there's any of you out there who are Rush fans, Rush, the Canadian rock band, their breakthrough album, if you like, was called 21/12, and the lyricist on that album was also the drummer, a chap called Neil Peart, who sadly, devastatingly passed last year from a terrible brain disorder. And Neil said at one point, when he was in his 40s and 50s, he said, you know, I do a diary every day, not because I want to show it to anybody. He said, because if I don't write it down, I don't remember. And I think that's happened to me because I've done diaries, I've done audio diaries, I've done written diaries, I've done all sorts of things, and I've stayed with it, particularly with the audio diary. I've got 10 years of my life on audio tape. So, and as I've said before, I will come back to that because I'm going to play some of that to let you hear some of the weird and wonderful things that I said when I was younger. But I think that becoming an archaeologist of your own life is something very valuable, and I found it really interesting. And I'm now at the point where every day I'm remembering, oh gosh, I remember when I met that guy, or how am I going to weave that story into a learning a way of teaching something, or all sorts of ways of doing it. And I don't always get it right, and I'm not saying I do, but I think if you apply that principle of stories sell to yourself, and you start to gather your own stories, it can be incredibly valuable. So that is the main premise for the show. But that's built on a foundation. And that foundation is one of, I guess it's a realization of the moment that we're living in. I think the global crisis that we have with things like the environment, with the sleeping crisis, with things like nuclear weapons, obviously with the COVID pandemic, dealing with crazy politicians like Trump. And I make no apologies for saying that. I mean, somebody said to me last week, you shouldn't talk politics. I'll talk about Trump. I don't like Trump. I would vote for a plant rather than Trump. And I'm not ashamed of saying that. And if you don't like it, fine, don't care. Sorry. But I think a lot of this has led us to a point that we have to think about each other more. Because a lot of this, not just politics, there's been things like, there has been like Brexit and everything else. And I don't mind on Brexit because there are arguments on both. It's not like Trump. There are arguments on both sides about Brexit. And I don't really care where you came down. It's up to you. And that's an adult process that you go through. And I respect your judgment on that. But all of this has been divisive. And I think that we need to be more empathetic to one another. And that's the second thing, or the foundation that I think underpins this whole show, is that, empathy is really important. And again, I've shown this caption, this graphic many, many times, but I don't make any apologies for it, because I think if we really understand that, a good story can act as what Chris Riddle called an empathy engine, it's incredibly powerful. It can actually help you see the world as others see it. You can experience the world through others' experience. And I think that is seriously important. So these are the two main sort of, if you like, contexts that have come out of this show that I didn't expect. I mean, I'd obviously heard of and used the facts tell, stories sell thing before when I did my first TEDx talk back 5 years ago in Warwick. But it never really all come together like it has in the last 15 weeks. So personally, I'm quite happy with that, and I'm quite pleased. And let me just put the caption off. Sorry, and I'm quite excited that has happened, because it's really became quite concrete in my mind that storytelling is a place that I need to spend more time with. So to help with all of that, I thought, well, how am I going to nurture this? How am I going to help people really understand the whole notion of the empathy engine, the facts tell, stories sell, didactic statement? Well, I thought, well, the first thing I could do is I could form a tribe. As I said way back on week 2, that human beings like being in tribes, we like being in groups, we like being with other people. So I've set up a Facebook group on this. Now, I'll put this on the screen for you. And it won't surprise you, I've called it the empathy engine. Now, Facebook doesn't have a very good interface in terms of naming things, as you can see there. No idea what that number means, but the empathy engine, here we are. I've even got the t-shirt done. Look, there you go, the empathy engine. I think that could be a really special place where, at least I hope it can become a special place where we can talk about our own stories, where I can hopefully help you develop your own stories and be challenged about your own stories, and to share those stories in a place that's safe. Because that's a private group. I'm not if someone gets to the point where they're trying to sell something, or someone's not really participating, then we can just ask them to leave gently, and they can move on. And I want it to be a place that people feel safe to go into. So I'd really like it if you would give it a go and go in there and join. And it's easy enough to find. Just type it into Facebook's search engine. I'm sure you can find it that way. So that's the new idea I've got there around trying to create an even more cohesive group than we have at the moment through this broadcast. And I have to say, the last few weeks have been fantastic, and no less than Tom's episode last week. We went on for an hour and a half last week, and I think I was very pleased with the episode because it was packed with value. And I mean, that's a word often overused in business, but I really think it was. Tom was given lots of ideas about how to structure a video, how to produce a video. We talked about how the edit is the story. We got deep into that, and how you should be thinking about, what's your golden thread, as I call it, through your story or through your video, to make sure that people get the point that you're trying to make. So I was very pleased with that episode, and that brings me to a part of last week that, as I formed the bridge between the episodes, that I would like to just talk about for a few minutes. And indeed, I'm going to use an artifact from behind me to tell you the story about it. But if you watch the episode, there's a section in it where I do a sort of a mocking part about how some people behave when they do presentations, and I'll repeat it now. But this is something I've seen now for years, and I think it used to be a useful way of thinking about how you present your story and how you build your story. But I think that day has come to an end. But this is what it used to be like. It used to be you would do things like this. They would say, okay, so you want to tell a story and you want to do it within a presentation. Well, what you need to do is take a lesson from News at 10. I'm sure some of you already heard about this. You need to say to them, okay, this is what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to say it. And this is what I'd like you to do. So maybe a call to action. So you sit there and go, this is what I would like to say. Then you go, right, now I'm going to say it. And at the end, you finish it by saying, and this is what I've said. Now, that 3-part structure has been with us for decades. And I think it's come to a point now that we need to revise it, we need to think about it in a different way. And to help with that, and funny enough, I think COVID has helped with that, because one thing that is not always obvious to people is that sometimes restraint is really, really powerful. What do I mean by that? Well, if you get, and again, Tom and I did talk about this last week briefly, but if you get two people with any idea, any creative mind, any type of, intellect in a room, and you say, right, you can spend as long as you like, you can blue sky think this. What tends to happen is not a lot, because people go down various drain pipes or rabbit holes, whatever it is you call them, rather than actually getting to the nub of the issue, really getting to the point of what you're trying to solve. So if you get me and Tom in a room like you saw last week, we've got so many issues in common, like science fiction, like filmmaking, like storytelling, that we can actually go in lots and lots of different directions. So it's not particularly helpful. So one of the experiences I had that really summed this up happened when I was working in the laboratories, when I was doing research. Now, I had a fairly, I think you could say quite reasonably, it was a threshold moment for me, the whole experience, because I didn't enjoy it all, if I'm honest. Some of it was downright awful, but and I will come back to that in future weeks, but there was parts of it that I really learned a lot about life and about how to, tell stories. And one of those was about telling personal stories or reporting on things like, research. And one of the oddest parts of it that I'd never really expected was the power of restriction. And the restriction I had was this, and I'm going to use this artifact to explain it. Now, there's a box here. Now, this is quite a heavy old thing, this. Now, this box, it's a metal, quite a chunky box. It's quite, quite secure. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that it's got something quite delicate inside it. And don't worry, it's not a dead body or anything. That's another week's show. But in here, now, some of you might never have seen one of these before. Depends what age you are. There's a clue. Now I've got to try and open the thing. Hold on. Let's push myself back a bit. Now in here, oh, sorry, not quite got it right yet. In here, I'll show you this, are a whole load of what are called slides. Now this is the sort of thing we used to do before we had PowerPoint. And I think it's worth, now just take one out and I'll put the others down because it's quite heavy and I'll end up dropping it on my toe, and that wouldn't be very nice. Now these things, now you won't be able to see, oh no, maybe you can actually. If I put that again, yeah. Now this here, look at that, you can actually see it. This here is a slide, it's actually a photograph where this, what you can see here, that dark blue, and you probably can't see the colour here, but that's dark blue thing is cartilage, and this bit below is bone, right? And my research was into what they call, you've probably heard of as osteoarthritis. It's actually not really called that. It's actually called osteoarthrosis. There's a reason for that, because itis means inflammation, and if you've got osteoarthritis, there isn't any inflammation, so it's actually arthrosis, but the public don't understand that, and doctors have never explained it anyway. But this is my work, and I studied the thickness of the cartilage, and I looked at why certain parts of the cartilage would break down early and why other parts wouldn't. And I also looked at how quickly things could move through the cartilage, and we were trying to work out if we could detect arthritis before it was visible. So was there something happening in the cells that happened before it became visible under the microscope over there? See the microscope? So that's a slide showing that. And one of these days I'm going to get a projector so I can actually show you some of these things. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is these things were quite expensive to make. Now this is plastic. I don't know if you can see if I can. This is plastic. But there was some of the slides were glass. And I had a look at it and tried to work it out, and it was difficult to work out how much it actually cost in contemporary money, but it was something like £30 a slide. And that meant, now bearing in mind that all of my work at the time was funded by people on the street shaking tins, collecting for the Arthritis and Rheumatism Council. So people on the streets were literally giving us money, and that paid my rather meagre, but nevertheless it still had a salary from that. And if these things cost that much, and what happens in the laboratories is the people who, the brilliant technicians who make this stuff would charge it back to the various projects in the pathology department where I worked. So if you're paying £30 a slide, that's a lot of people putting a lot of money into tins on the high street in Edinburgh, as it was where I was living. So, this thing was actually very valuable. And what that meant was, this is not a good example, this is just a photograph, but it is a good example in terms of you need to get the best photograph. But what it meant was that if you were using a slide or you were presenting using slides, you had to make sure you got it right, because it was so expensive that if you got it wrong, the professor wouldn't be too happy with you. And my professor was quite a stern fella, and he would not be happy if I wasted slides, if I made a spelling mistake, or I didn't make the point, or I put too many words on it, or it wasn't visible, or whatever. And so these slides really put a discipline into the whole process. You were acutely aware before you got them printed, you had to get them right. Now, PowerPoint, and the way it's structured, not just PowerPoint, you look at other presentation engines as well, they're the same. They force you, or they give you such an easy route into, bullet points. Bullet points is the one, oh God, it really drives me nuts. But it really forces you into these things, and people do it really quickly. So they just bash out. You'll even hear the language, I'll just go and bash out a presentation. And off they go, and they literally bash it out, and they've got all these bullet points, and they present it. And they wonder why people get bored, and they wonder why people's brains suffer what's called cognitive dissonance. They're like, oh, not another slide. I'm sure you've seen it, and I'm sure you've probably experienced it, when you've been using Zoom or whatever, because it's just sheer laziness. Or I guess if I'm being generous, it's convenience. Because there's the template, and bash, in it goes, bish, bash, bosh, and it's done. Whereas back in the day, the restriction around that made us really think about what we put on those slides before we printed them. So that's an example of how restriction can help. And that's why I go back to where Tom and I were speaking last week. We needed to focus. We needed to be careful we didn't go off on a tangent. Now, I said at the end of last week that Tom and I would come back, and we'd probably come back and talk about science fiction and story, because there's a whole genre there that Tom and I have a real passion for. And I think we will do that, because I think there's something in that, because in many ways, and this is quite contentious for some people, fine, I think science fiction is actually the story of change. It's what change is all about. Science fiction is about change. So we'll come back to that. But think about that yourself. Think about how, you can, if you restrict something, it actually brings out more rather than less. So what does that mean in terms of today, in terms of what we're going to do moving forward with ARTEFACTLive? Well, one of the things that I've been keen to do is, I'm laying the foundations just now. The first 15, 16 weeks have been about, the different topics. So we've looked at poetry, we've looked at myth, we've looked at the opening line, we've looked at structuring stories, we've looked at classical and non-classical structures for stories, we've looked at storytelling using film, we've looked at human beings and how magnificent we are, and how that can be stories can be created around that. We've spoken about music and the wonderful and massive impact that music can have on how we feel. I've still got sessions to do on things like science. I've got to do one about the neuroscience of story, and I want to do one about the evolution of story. So we've got work to do in terms of the grounding for this project. We've got work to do. But ultimately, what I want to do is I want to actually look at some real issues and start getting us as a community to start telling stories about real issues. So you can pick up, common themes that are in the media just now, like, for example, mental health, like, for example, COVID. We need to start to tell stories about these things, because if we do, going right back to where I started half an hour ago, we'll start to understand each other's experiences. We'll start to have empathy for each other. So there's one of my favorite websites and groups that I've mentioned before, and it's called The Moth. And The Moth is about just that. The Moth is an online community now, which encourages like summits where they go in with a theme, and that theme may be forgetfulness or love, or it could be football, it could be and a whole range of things. It's not it's not always an obvious one they come up with either. And I think that is a good model for us to borrow and develop that as part of this show. So I think that will be certainly part of what we'll do in 2021. The other thing that is an opportunity, really, if you're a leader or you're hoping to be a leader, I think that it is perfectly reasonable to say that the way people will respond to leaders and will respond to people over the next few years, this COVID time will be remembered. It will be remembered in a number of different ways, and it will be remembered for incompetence, competence, good stuff, bad stuff, all the different things. But I think the leaders who have done well during this process, have tried to do well during this process, but more importantly, they then take that experience and they share those stories with their communities. They're the ones who are going to do well for the next 5 years. So you can see a company that has not responded well to COVID, who has perhaps done some silly things, not been empathetic to their people, not been thoughtful in terms of how they could move their business in different directions. These companies are going to struggle because people will not look back fondly on them. They'll say, I used to think it was a decent company, but what happened then during the COVID pandemic kind of showed you what you're really like. And I think that is a powerful theme for next year. And hopefully with the wonderful progress we've had with the scientific community getting on top of this with vaccines, etc., and then beginning to roll them out, hopefully by the middle of next year, we can start to really open up again and tell these stories. And one of the things that I've mentioned before, and I said this when I had my friend Joe on, we were talking about transformation and story, I would like to run this as almost like a summit where we have themed one, maybe a whole day, or well, not a whole day, you get Zoom apocalypse if we do that to you, but maybe half a day where we invite people from all over the world to come in and we say, okay, tell us your story about COVID, tell us your story about whatever. I would love to do that. And I'm actually trialing it in another group that I run on a Friday night. Now, it's got nothing to do with business. It's to do with music, and it's an old nostalgic website that we have about a venue in Scotland called the Glasgow Apollo that closed in 1985. I mean, it's so niche, it's unbelievable. But we've got a wonderful community there. There's 8,500 people on the Facebook group. And what I've asked them to do, and they're responding, as I've said, look, we're not getting younger anymore. We're all getting to the point where there's so many stories you start to forget what your name is. So I've asked them to start producing stories about their experience when they went to concerts, or they went to get tickets, or they met their boyfriend or girlfriend, or they had their first drink, or all these myriad of stories. I've asked them to create little mini videos of those stories. And it's brilliant because they are responding already. They're coming back to me and they're saying, do you know, I'd never really thought of that. And of course, I've said to them, get an artifact, get a concert ticket, or get a whatever that you had that you maybe borrowed from the Apollo. There's quite a few of them I've got, like armrests from chairs. It's quite weird. But, go and get something and just tell the story of how you got that or how you came about that. The other one that's come up a lot, and it's quite sweet, is, tell the story about how you met your partner there. You maybe took your date there and you fell in love and you got married and you've had 5 kids and you got grandchildren. Tell that story. And they're starting to do it. And amazingly, an hour ago, just before the show, I got another another video from someone else. And this is a fella who used to be in a band. And they were quite successful. And they were actually, they supported various acts at the Apollo in Glasgow. And he said, got to tell you a story, Scott. And it's like, okay, right. I've just met in your group one of the guys I was in the group with. I haven't spoken to him for 25 years. And you know what? We're getting the band back together. So even, in that little story, that little experience, it's got nothing to do with, what we're trying, well, I guess it's linked to what we're trying to do here. But even that has popped out that, the artifact there is, I guess it's a space. And I guess it's me asking them to think about their experience. I don't know. I need to get more out of them to really understand it. But that has created something, and it's brilliant. I'm so pleased about it that it's happening. So let's hope that we can do the same in our little group here, that we can start to create things. And I know a couple of you have already said, you've got me thinking about my story, Scott, and I'm going to have a go at it. Someone said to me last week, Joe, actually, who, I don't know if you're here today, Joe said, you've encouraged me to start writing again. That's exactly what I want to happen. So anyway, so that's the nub of this week. That's the things that I'm really excited about. I'm very proud of it. I think the fact that we're now streaming onto 7 or 8 platforms. We've had people from, I think it's 15 different countries have come on now, which is bizarre, but terrific. Listening to this Scotsman on the on a webcam from a little office in the Cotswolds. It's quite ridiculous. But I really appreciate that. And again, I'm hoping that we can get stories from other countries. I'd love to know what other countries think about what the UK are doing just now in terms of COVID. Do they know about what we're doing? Maybe not, I don't know. But that's the sort of thing I'd really like to encourage. Now, before we finish, I'm going to do something I've done before, and I'm going to play a little film. And this is a little film, and it's poetry basically. And it's a piece of poetry that I have actually used before, but I think it's so powerful that I think it's worth playing again. So this is a piece by the wonderful poet David White, and David is a sort of Yorkshire mixed up with an Irish ancestry with all sorts of funny background. He was actually a biologist, so good on him. Way back, he worked in the Galapagos Isles, and he's got a really sharp mind. And I had the pleasure, I met him a couple of times, and there was one night I was sitting in a hotel in the Cotswolds the night before one of his events. And we'd arranged to meet, all of us. There was a few of us. There was about 10 of us. But I was just there alone with David by the fire. And we both had a glass of red wine. And this piece of poetry had been, niggling away in the back of my mind for a long time. And I said, David, can we have a chat about it? So I'm going to play it, and I'll tell you what happened after I've played it to you. But I think that this is so powerful that it's always worth repeating. So this is David White with his absolutely brilliant piece called Start Close In.
Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question, Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple to hear another's voice. Follow your own voice. Wait until that voice becomes a private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question, Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple to hear another's voice. Follow your own voice. Wait until that voice becomes a private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take.
Now, I love that. I love the start close in with the step you don't want to take. I think it's just fireworks go off in my head whenever I hear it. And when I asked David about it, and there's two things about David. One is he's incredibly intelligent and he can really tell a story. But the other thing, and I think it's something that I would like to explore further, and including with myself, I don't, unless you're weird, that man's voice is hypnotic, and he has this odd sort of Yorkshire stroke Irish stroke. He says his accent's somewhere out in the middle of the Atlantic. He lives in America now, and yeah, you can hear that as well. But that sonorous voice that he has really helps with the story. And it's funny because a friend of mine today, Breed Nunn, who's a learning and development expert, and she very kindly did me a testimonial today. She told a story about me, which was really lovely. And she said in her note, she said, I hate listening to myself. I hate hearing myself. And I think that, there's something in that we need to explore, because David nails it. I hate my voice, and I've got a post-it here saying slow down, because I've got that classic Scottish brrr, and you need to slow down, particularly when you're getting an audience out with, the United Kingdom. And even that needs to be explored further. So we will come back to that. And there's some lovely writing in that space that I will share with you. But I hope you enjoyed that poem once again. And it's wonderful to hear it. And I must have heard it 100 times. And it every time I listen to it, there's a little nuance, a little something pops out once again. I think, yeah, keep going, Scott. Start with that step you don't want to take. So a little comment from Joe here. That's lovely, Joe. Thank you very much for saying this. I now have many stories thanks to you. Cheers and a Merry Christmas. And it's not thanks to me. It's thanks to yourself. It's thanks to seeing these stories in yourself and actually, hopefully, Joe, writing them down and starting to share them, because they are when they're in your head, you're okay. But when you write them down, people can start to overhear them. Yeah. People can start to overhear them. And if they overhear your story, they go, oh, and they get interested, and things can start to happen from that point. So that's all I've got to say, really, for this week. It was just an opportunity to take a little pause. I wish you all a Merry Christmas, whether you celebrate it or not. Have a nice time anyway. Have a nice break, hopefully. Although some of us have had too big a break. And I hope that you join me again next week. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to stop over the festive period, because I think I've had some feedback saying I look forward to this. I'm getting that with this broadcast and with my music broadcast, that people are saying, yeah, it's starting to form part of my week, and that's lovely feedback. I just think it's overwhelmingly wonderful when people say that. So a couple of things just to remind you, if you are enjoying this, you want to see more, or you want to watch the highlight reels, go over to my YouTube channel. Here it is here. Please hit subscribe if you get a chance to do it, because it helps me, because as the numbers go up, I can do more with the YouTube channel, more flexibility. So I would appreciate it. The other thing, and I've never actually said this on the show before, is I'm doing this on my own time. I spend a lot of time on this. I love it. So it's not a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not a challenge, but I do love it. And if you want to support me in what I'm doing, I have what they call a Patreon page now, where you can buy me a beer every month or whatever. And a few folk have done it already, and it's amazing. It actually reduced me to tears when I started to get, it's just $5 a month or whatever. But it's amazing that people are doing that, and I so appreciate it. To remind you of where we started before I finish, I started talking about Rob Walker's work and significant object work. And I think that should encourage everybody to think about what their own stories were. So as always, my call to action, folks, at the end of every single show is to think about, or to be aware of what's happening around you. Because one of those stories could change everything. Could not only change you, but it could change the world. And I really, really think that storytelling is one of the key things that will help us move into the future together and successfully. Have a lovely Christmas. I'll see you next week. My name is Scott McArthur, and thanks very much for tuning in to Artefact Live.